Hi, I'm Leila Scott Price, co founder and co director of the Center for Healing Arts and Sciences, and you're at Get Centered, our vodcast. Thanks for being here. Today, we talk about being triggered and whether or not we should protect our young ones and even our college students from things that are triggering, or should we shepherd people through what it's like to be triggered and how to handle that? Is being triggered about others, or is it really about ourselves? So, stick around to the end to hear all the good stuff. And please remember to subscribe, hit the like, hit the bell that will remind you when our new episodes come out. Share it with people that you think might benefit from watching this episode. And thanks so much.
Well, welcome back, folks, to Get Centered, where the clinicians and practitioners at the Center for the Healing Arts and Sciences come together and talk about topics. And today's topic is triggered. So I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about this term and kind of related issues. But first of all, the term triggered, I think just to break it down a little bit, and then I'll pass the torch to you guys. But I want to stir the pot. So triggered, the etymology, I did just a bit of research today. The etymology, of course, is more attached to a mechanistic device, a gun. It was ticker, I think, was the first label, but then it turned into trigger. And the meaning in the mechanistic framework is that when I pull this trigger, something happens. So it's really looking at causality. And over time, that's morphed. Essentially around the 1970s, when people were coming back from the Vietnam War, triggered started to take on a bit of a new meaning with PTSD. So the idea is it's a trauma-based response. So something is triggered within me as a result of an environmental stimulus. So for example, we hear about people that hear a car backfire and it triggers the same kind of trauma response that happened when they were in the war, or when there was some kind of trauma, whether it be a violent trauma, sexual trauma, and so on. So this term was a bit dormant as far as popular culture is concerned for a while, until, interestingly enough, around the 2000s, it started to increase its use. But one paper I was reading talked about how the term triggered really was popularized when social media came online. So all of a sudden, people are using this term triggered to essentially mean I'm having a trauma response as a result of what you're saying, whether it be something that's discounting, something that's you're unaware that you're going to elicit that response. But interestingly enough, it started to leave the dominion or the domain of the trauma response as it kind of was seeping out into popular culture. And all of a sudden, around 2014 to 2016, what started to happen is that universities began to put trigger warnings in their classes to warn people about the potential for a trauma response. The idea was that it would allow for them to be prepared, whether they can be prepared psychologically or they could leave the room if they needed to. Where it gets dicey is what then started to happen is people would talk about trigger warnings when it came to discomfort. So trigger warning was then associated with disgust, with dislike, with things that bothered us. And as we see in the university setting, what began to happen is that student bodies started to get upset at universities when they were potentially triggering other people. And this is where we get into a really interesting discussion about a core dynamic. If I have something that is bringing up a discomfort in me, is the onus on me to get you to stop what you're doing so that you're not triggering me, or other responses? And many universities started to weigh in. One particular university, University of Chicago, said we do not put trigger warnings out there. And I think that this gets into a really important discussion when it comes to how we use the term triggered. And I want to open it up to you guys in a second, which is, do you think that organizations need to govern themselves against potentially eliciting a negative response amongst those people who come into their community? And I want to start, like I want to pass this off to you guys, and I have a number of other points to get to, but I want to start the discussion. So when we started talking about doing an episode on triggered, what came to mind to you all?
A lot of things, but I want to start with that piece that you were talking about with the universities and this warning label that can come, slap across a syllabus. That concerns me. I think I can understand why it might have come about. I feel compassion, for the need for it, or for somebody who feels the need for it. However, to me, it's like it potentially makes us even more, it assumes there's a fragileness to a person, which we've talked about before, that we have resilience far greater than we tend to acknowledge. And there's even a concept out there that's called antifragile. I just quickly looked it up because it's in a book called Antifragile by Nassim Taleb.
Mhm.
And he says, in short, if you're fragile, life hits you hard and you break. If you're resilient, life hits you hard, you withstand more, but eventually break. If you're anti-fragile, when life hits you hard, you actually get stronger. He says, think about that. The more you get kicked around and challenged by life, the stronger you get. Wouldn't that be awesome? So that's my comment there. And I have so much more, but maybe I'll just leave that thought right there for a sec.
This is also discussed a lot in a book called The Coddling of the American Mind by Jonathan Haidt, where he refers to that book, Antifragile, and talks about when we talk about this kind of resilience is as a result of being challenged. And there's a huge difference in being traumatized and being challenged. And one thing that happened around that time is the whole issue of social media, where it really allows people to live in bubbles where the idea of one's ideas even being challenged, you can be isolated from that. So, of course, working with people who've had, severe traumas, of course, re-traumatizing is a terrible thing. Bullying is a terrible thing. But, as a Jungian, we've got to look at the two opposites. If traumatizing and bullying is terrible on one end, the idea of attempting to go through life without resistance is unhealthy for the individual, just like not building up antibodies, just like, not having challenges growing up. So, again, like a Jungian point of view would be, say, so what are the opposites we're talking about? And what is a realistic, healthy way to approach these two opposites?
The word triggered in the way that it's come to mean a lot of things, like you said, beyond what in the way that I'm going to use it right now, which is that when we see that there's something that's scary, or we interpret something we're scared of, or the sound that I heard when I heard in a traumatic experience was, which was a bombing in a public place, was what I interpreted as the sound of a, what do you call it? Like a dumpster being dropped.
Mm-hmm.
You know that sound of a dumpster being dropped? Like, pa-pa. That's what it sounded like. So, the other day I was sitting and meditating and the dumpster dropped. And immediately my mind goes, is that a dumpster or is that a bomb? Because it sounds the same. So what happens is just technically on what I understand from the neuroscience of whatever the most updated thing is that when we are scared in some way, or we interpret some kind of a threat, we're anxious or we're angry, then our amygdala, the part of our brain that is built to respond to these kind of like scary situations, kicks on. And what it does is they call it an amygdala hijack. So the amygdala takes all the power in your brain. So and your executive function is in the prefrontal cortex. So like that's where you make good decisions. That's why we tell like teenagers, don't mess around too much with your brain, because it's still growing, right? It's still building and growing. So what happens is that the amygdala takes all the power, and it's trying to do you solid. It's trying to basically protect you from any danger. So it mobilizes you. It starts pumping cortisol through your body. It starts pumping adrenaline through your body. Because if you need to move quickly, right, because the sound you heard was really a bomb, right? So maybe you do need to move quickly. And so it's going to tell you either fight, flight, freeze. It's putting you in that position. But what they show is that seasoned practitioners of meditation are able to detangle that. They almost get a kind of immunity to that kind of emotional hijacking. That's what they call it. It's a hijack. So it's not that the system doesn't come online. The system comes online, but it's met with like almost instantly. Like it takes a little bit, a beat for a minute, but almost co-arising is my executive function that says, oh, I know that's a sound that could be a bomb. I know that's a sound that could be also a dumpster. And then I'm not in a fight, flight, freeze for God knows how long, right? It's like kind of, I have like a detach mechanism. It's integrated. Those two pieces are integrated in my mind. And so it doesn't allow me to be just kind of like totally thrown away too quickly. And for God knows how long. I think that's the issue with getting triggered, right? Is that it's not the issue of that your fight flight comes on. We want it to come on. It's a good thing. Right? The issue is that you don't know how to turn it off. You don't know how to turn it off. And then then it's existential almost. It's like really, it's a real big problem that it's coming on because you don't know how to make it stop. And then and if you have to live like that, that's really hard. That's a really hard place to live in.
I'll go. No, there was like, so we're just kind of gonna riff. So, John, to answer your question, no, I don't think that there should be trigger warnings on campuses.
You're staking a claim there. All right.
To certain like capacity, though. I know that, using the word, because it's like we're kind of figuring out whether we want to use the word or if it's the concept that kind of drives us to have that emotional response. I think that there's almost a shift now, kind of like you going through the historical kind of components of where this word kind of originated from. I think each year is so different with the technological advances and with social media that the word trigger, I mean, I even just looked it up. There's a bunch of memes on it, or there's a bunch of videos, and there's so many different things. And it's just like, what the hell? It's like, where is all this coming from? And I think that based on what I've seen, kind of, even with some of my friends that they have brought up, it seems like it's like the newest version of feeling offended and the new way to mock someone's like lack of constitution. And I don't necessarily, agree with, people doing that, because it, with the PTSD portion of it, if you're kind of keep consistently bringing up that word, that's kind of what creates that reaction or response, kind of what like Ariel was saying. And so that's kind of, for me, I feel like that needs to be separated in terms of understanding the word and where to specifically use the word versus understanding the concept and how it kind of is reflected back to our day-to-day life. If that makes any sense.
It does. And what I will say is that you staking a claim and saying that, no, I don't think the research is in your favor. Ding, ding, ding. So what the three things, of all the studies that I read, and I'll post them below, so check the resource page. What it did when in university settings, when they had to do some kind of big trigger warning, it increased the perception of vulnerability. So more people that walked into class felt like they were on like that seeking system, Ariel, that you're talking about, like looking for danger, looking for threat. Number one. Number two, it increases the belief that survivors of trauma are fragile. Two, ubiquitous, right? Universal kind of thing. And number three, it increases anxiety. And so again, of all the studies, now there are other things to do, I think, to kind of solve this issue, but when human beings are operating in mass, we don't exactly do a good job. So we throw the hammer down and say, well, just don't do that ever again. Or yes, let's do it every situation. And we're really painting ourselves in a corner, because it is not curing the thing that we're trying to cure by letting people know that things are going to be dangerous. And Leila, Scott, to your point, it is a deterrent to creating a community of resiliency. And I think that's really unfortunate. That's kind of where we are, where the few are having to essentially regulate and minimize the ability for us to have difficult conversations and to do what we tell all of our children to do. Use your words. Use your words. Let's talk about it. Leila, Scott, you look like you had something that was bubbling up.
Well, it's just interesting, that research, because they've done research in hospitals and so forth, medical communities, where they measured pain response when warning that something was going to be painful versus just going ahead and doing whatever could have been perceived to be painful. Well, lo and behold, the people who experienced more pain were the ones who were told this might hurt. So, for example, not that acupuncture is painful, it's not. However, there are certain points that can elicit more of a sensation than others. And because we tend to associate any sensation that we didn't expect with pain, unfortunately, you think pain and then the brain says pain and then there you have pain, so if I'm about to put in one, maybe at the very, very tip of an extremity where there's the nerve trunks are larger and there's going to be more sensation, I don't say this might hurt a little bit, and then if somebody does say, oh, I felt that one, it's like, I tell them, well, I didn't tell you because, I try to qualify it a little bit, but just to kind of bring in that physical experience, but also just to speak to that pendulum effect that is inevitable in culture. I think we are coming out of a period of time when we were largely insensitive and unaware of each other and how other people experienced the world or what kind of conditions they were coming from. It's so much easier to leave the CVS or something without feeling angry that the person who checked me out was short with me. If I can go to a place and think, you know what, she might be having a terrible day, or gotten some really bad news before I came in. You know what I'm saying? Even just that little isolated experience, much less somebody having had the first several years of their life or decades of their life be traumatized, just helps you approach other people with compassion. So of course now we have for a period of time those memes you were talking about, Gia, the warnings in class. I think it's an overcompensation for where we're coming from, and that we will end up with consciousness somewhere in that middle path,
Yeah. I want to circle back to something, Ariel, you were saying too, that when you were talking about the kind of neuroanatomy of trauma. And another interesting fact is when I went to a kind of neuroscience-based program when I did one of my bachelor's degrees, and we did a lot of studies on the brain. And one of my favorite facts was that when we have an aversive stimulus, the brain essentially, this is simplistic, but it has two pathways. So if you hear or, so loud bang, right, the dumpster, what'll happen is that the sensory system will send it either through the frontal cortex or straight like a main line to the amygdala. Because if I just jump, right, if it's an instinct and I jump, before I even registered what was happening, that's my body responding in a way that's helping to protect me. And that's a system that we have in place that does that. It's survival. The other is, when I get more experience being around certain things and when I kind of move into those sounds, I'm able to analyze frontal cortex, oh, maybe that was the book that fell off the table that was kind of leaning off the side, or maybe that was the dumpster, or maybe that was this. And that executive functioning is able to come online. The second piece that I found really interesting, and I had a slight little argument with a neuroscientist friend of mine about this, and then I ended up producing the paper and she was blown away. Ariel, this is in your favor. Everybody go see Ariel if you need help with the following. 28 days of meditation for around 30 minutes per day reduces the size of the amygdala. That's radical, man. So we're
And
what we're
vaccines.
yeah, and what we're talking about is that if somebody is quote triggered, and their response is to try to shape their world in order to not ever have that feeling touched upon, things like this can't happen. Because if I am triggered and then I say, okay, I need to do something about this, so I start meditation, I'm doing acupuncture, I'm talking to a therapist or analyst, all of a sudden I become more reflective and I can be more present, and I don't have to get so reactive, and that amygdala response isn't so big, so that I'm then perpetuating the dynamic, which is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because if I have the belief that I'm fragile, then I will behave in fragile ways. And I think it's great to listen to you guys talk about this, because you're hitting on all the important kind of terms in this, whether it's resiliency or fragility. But I think maybe we can move into this. Stop me if you guys have anything else to go on to this point. But I think from all of our perspectives, one of the things that we do in our various practices and modalities is to go inward. So if something is triggered, that is an opportunity to explore, to interrogate inside, right? To communicate, right? So you go with a safe or trusted person, and you're actually vocalizing and talking about the experience. And so then you're able to go, for example, in a university setting, you're able to go to the professor the first day and say, hey, I've got some history with trauma. I don't want to go into it. And I just want to check and see if there are any days where you think there's going to be something going on. And I want you to let me know. I'm talking to my therapist about it. And I certainly want to be conscious, but it's a little raw right now and I'm working on it, but that day I may step out. That's totally different than kind of somewhat mandating that the university make some, sweeping response that says, no, and this is tough because I'm so sensitive to trauma, but what it ends up doing is infantilizing the entire community and saying that we can't handle that. And if anybody's listening to this and you've suffered some kind of a trauma, I urge you, the data on recovering is strong. You can become a survivor of your trauma if you go into one of these modes, meditation, acupuncture, therapy, body-centered therapy, certainly, dance, yoga, get embodied into yourself so that you're not perpetrated upon by this history, continued perpetration, as opposed to liberation, where you can then get inside of it and free yourself from the kind of bindings that trauma creates for us. This, Ariel, what you're talking about, you're able to hear that loud bang and go, okay, versus keep yourself inside and not go out and explore the world in a way that I know you love to.
There's a great Buddhist story. I think I read it in a Pema Chodron book about someone walking out in the world and says, well, it hurts my feet, so I should cover the entire world in leather so that my feet don't hurt. And the realization that it's impossible to make the world like that I have to take, and again, we're not talking about severely traumatized people. There are a lot of things we're not talking about here. But even with severely traumatized people, there is an amount of personal responsibility, and the shift from victimhood and victim identification into empowerment and, living in the world and protecting yourself.
Yes. And John, I love what you were saying about that approach. Like if you are a student and you wanted to go ahead and just very discreetly mention something and prepare for something, not only is that just useful, but it's empowering.
Totally.
And even like there's certain point prescriptions that we'll use in acupuncture that are commonly referred to as good for PTSD. But I try to, even if a patient comes in, whether it's minor or massive PTSD, I'll try to say, can we reframe this for a second? Let's call it post-traumatic stress and leave off the disorder part, because you are not disordered. You have post-traumatic stress. We can work with this. We can reframe this. And of course, y'all have heard of post-traumatic growth. Just even that verbal reframe, what that does to your wiring and the expansion of possibility around what can come after trauma. We've talked about that in other sessions, how there's so much possibility there. Not that it's easy, but it's there. Yeah, I'll leave it there for a second.
It makes me think about now something, Leila Scott, that you and Ariel have both been kind of hitting on. I guess you all have, but there's this old in cognition and perception and memory. There is what's called a flashbulb memory, and flashbulb memory is when we have some kind of a trauma, the memory tends to be heightened. So there's something about our sensory system that takes in everything, and the way people will describe this is the world slows down, or they remember smells. I mean, it's like your sensory system gets supercharged in that moment. And what I think about trauma, this trauma response, is that there's a flashbulb memory, and what happens in a lot of trauma is that it becomes stuck, it coagulates. And so in our psyche, this event becomes somewhat concretized, like hard concrete. And that's a belief system. It informs a belief system that then we continue to live out over and over again. And I also thought about this really fascinating response that we have to, it's part of the disgust system. And what it is that if I go to a restaurant and I eat some kind of a food and I get food poisoning, it's a single trial design, essentially, from a behavioral perspective. What it means is that I have an adaptation that I am not going to eat that food again for a long time. And part of what's happening in the body is it's saying, you were really injured there, don't go back. Don't eat that fish, don't eat those berries, don't eat that guacamole or whatever. And those are the things that happen when trauma happens, is that our body somewhat aligns itself to not ever experience that thing again. So the way this manifests psychologically is avoidance. So the battle cry of trauma is avoidance. And that's what's so interesting about this whole entire trigger warning thing, is that we are avoiding, and we are somewhat aligning ourselves with avoidance, when one of the best therapeutic approaches you can possibly do is exposure therapy, where you're actually engaging and exposing yourself, not to the trauma event, but if you got a trauma with spiders, you're going to start systematically exposing yourself to spiders again. Leila Scott, you got something bubbling up. What was?
I do. You're talking about the avoidance piece, and I would challenge that a little bit and say there's actually those that get caught in needing to create triggers, because it has to do with where your process was interrupted when you were injured. The first nervous system reaction to a trauma is to first try to connect socially, just normal social connection. And if that's not able to happen, you try to get the hell out of there. If that was interrupted, then you go into the freeze state, which is like potentially even fainting or feigning death, something like that. And so depending on where your trauma left you in that recovery phase, you will tend to live there. So there can be people who appear to be just super removed and in that, freeze state, but they're actually inside. They are just on fire because their sympathetic nervous system just never got to recover. So I would just say that, yes, there's a total avoidance from a large portion of the population. And I would say in another part of the population, there's almost this, the looking for it. They want to go find the trigger.
What came up there is that repetition compulsion that we've talked about a number of times in this, is that what you're talking about? That we kind of continue to live out that?
Yeah, exactly. The almost like what we call the self-fulfilling prophecies. Not always, right? It depends on where the injury occurred.
Right. It's more nuanced
Where
than,
we got stuck when we were trying to recover from the injury.
uh-huh.
Your way to say it.
Yeah.
So I've got a few things that I'm kind of thinking about. One is just like a fun example of my wife and I went to go buy plants for our balcony, and we were looking at different citronellas, and there were a bunch of them that looked great, and one of them just looked like it had been through some things, but it was also really hardy. Like it was not growing straight up. It was like kind of out to the side and kind of all distorted. And I told her, no, we need that one. She's like, well, this is the one. This is the only one that's not going in the right direction. I was like, yeah, but look, you can tell that it had to overcome something. So it's the strongest plant here. These other ones haven't had any adversity. And this plant is like hardy and strong, and it doesn't matter if we do or don't water it, if we neglect it, if we go away for a few weeks in the summer, it still recovers. So that's one thing just about strength. And I like this reframe of it's not because you're broken. It's something that can be actually an asset to you if you go through it, right? And I'm thinking about these flashbulb memories, but my question is, because I just don't know. I've heard I hate when I even say this to even frame it this way, but I've heard that in some cases it's important to be able to feel it fully, and that is going to be what kind of that exposure therapy of going back and actually feeling what was meant to be felt but couldn't be felt fully in that experience. Is that where the healing is, or um, I guess I'm kind of wondering what's the balance between I know you're not going to tell me, oh yeah, for sure 100%, there's no 100%. But the question is, what's the process with working on a psychological and level with it. I know that in my work I'm helping people be able to feel whatever is meant to be felt, but also being mindful that our system has all kinds of onboard avoidance mechanisms to not let us go anywhere that we don't feel safe going. Like for instance, for me, like I'll fall asleep, or I'll go into a fantasy or something. If I'm trying to go somewhere too deep, that feels like the water's too deep for me, my system will just make me go to sleep. I'll find myself drooling, on the cushion, and the bell rings and 30 minutes have gone by, but I've been sleeping for 27. So I'm curious, what's your thoughts on that?
I did a retreat once, and I don't know if this gets to your question, but it came to mind. I did a retreat once with a woman that worked with veterans in PTSD, and one of the ways that she worked with them was she would take an old, you couldn't do it now. I guess you could do it now. She would take an old video camera and record the vet talking about the issue, the moment where they were traumatized. They rounded a corner and their best friend was shot and killed in front of them. This is the scenario that she gave me. And what happens is we start to carry a lot of beliefs that are both conscious and unconscious about our role in that. I don't know about you guys, but as odd as it is, even today, I got a message about an old patient of mine who's died. And I sat there and I got up this morning and it hurt. It just hurt. And my first thought was, what if I could have done something? Like, that's weird. I mean, I haven't seen this guy in 2 years. So it was a weird thought, and it's happened a number of times. And that's just a 1 on a scale of 100. So what this woman does is that she'll take the soldier and she'll record them giving the narrative. I was doing this and this is what happened, da, da, da. And then she'll put the tape in a video cassette recorder or player and play back what was just recorded, set the camera on top of the TV, and then record the soldier having a conversation with him or herself. So they would say really harsh things like, "You fucked up, man. You fucked up because you didn't see it coming. You fucked up because you didn't go in front. It could have been you. It could have been like," and they're starting to excavate all these beliefs that are hidden beneath the surface. Then she does it again. She takes the conversation that this person just had, puts that tape in the recorder and records them again, having this meta conversation about their initial responses. And what she started to notice is that over time, you keep doing this and it gets deeper and deeper. What starts to emerge is compassion. What starts to happen is forgiveness. And so the more and more you get down in there, and these other parts of ourselves start to come up, so naturally, she was like, it was amazing to watch these soldiers start to soften and start to tell themselves, it's not your fault. And so I think at its baseline, what happens is that all these cognitive belief structures set in and they become fixed. And we're not even aware of it. And so the individual continues to live it out. They continue to live it out. And if you look at the DSM, which is a book I read reluctantly, I'm not totally fond of it. But if you read the diagnostic manual, one of the things that you find is that under the heading of PTSD, you will have several different criterion, and they range from avoidance of real or imagined trauma response, a traumatic experience. Then things like alcohol use and drug use are high up. Again, a lot of these avoidance characteristics that are trying to support the individual in not actually facing, oddly enough, not facing what really is underneath the surface, because what they anticipate they're going to get to is that first level where they're just saying, "You fucking piece of shit, you messed up. It's your fault." And I need anybody listening, because as I heard, I have so many people's minds in mind right now as I'm thinking about the kind of resentment and hatred that we carry as a result of blaming ourselves for something for which we had no control. And I promise you, anybody that has had a trauma that may be watching this, there is levels beneath that you can get to if you start to just open to it, which is why one of these trigger warnings, it totally hijacks the most effective treatments for trauma to have that natural system of compassion and love actually take over.
I was going to wait. Do Rodney and Gia, do y'all have anything right now?
I was just thinking about one thing. I mean, how many of us have adopted rescue dogs at some point that were scared or traumatized at some point? And that's why when, in a Jungian sense, when we're talking about complexes with a client or something, something's being, if we want to use the word, triggered in the present, but it really has something to do with the past. And the question, and this goes to Ariel, the question is, are we able to discern, is this really happening in the present or not? And one issue with therapy is that, I've said this before, we're such rational creatures that we think that once we realize, it's like, oh, okay, this doesn't have anything to do with my partner. This has to do with something that happened, growing up in my family, that the realization is one thing. But, if we go back to the rescue dog, the process of rewiring the brain and learning a different pattern is a much longer process. So yes, it is possible, but like you said, it's only possible with consciousness and awareness of what's happening and how it connects to our past.
So there's a moment where you make the mental connection of like, oh, I'm currently having an experience, and the reason I'm so sensitive to this in this way is I would say for myself, I'm having an overreaction to this moment, or a reaction that's not calibrated to what's happening because of a past trauma. And then there's another piece of that, another step of that, which is, Okay, so now, even though I know that's so, how do I help that kind of settle, or like in a body sense, but also neurologically, there's now going to have to be a repatterning, there is neuroplasticity. That's the good news, right? You can reframe it. You can do the work, but it's work, right? When John was saying, "Oh, 30 minutes for 28 days." 30 minutes is a long time, brother.
Yeah, it is, man.
30 minutes is a long time, and that's I'm saying that even for me, and I'm been doing this a long time, and so that 28 days of 30 minutes a day is a serious commitment for somebody who may not have a practice at all. You know, even if you're super committed, that's a big deal. It's not just take this pill, here you go, which I wish. I'm curious what the body side of it though is in terms of, or like how do we work with that? How do we help people not only on the mental level of understanding it, how come to that level of compassion for themselves, but then also have, that we know I mean, we've talked about this a little bit. The body keeps the score,
Mhm.
and so then, okay, how do I go about the other pieces of what needs to be healed? Which is if that cortisol was running through my system and I locked that in on a muscular level. So now what? Now what? Right? How do I let that be the thing that is the strength of that citronella, right? That's the strength. It's I looked at its root and I saw that root is all messed up and tangled. That's why it's strong, because it's strong there, right? So it's not the leaves. Forget about the leaves. It's the root. So how do we get to that root and keep it strong without letting it take over? So I have a lot of questions about this.
Yeah. Well, the place I want to start with that, and the place I wanted to start even when you first asked that question, of do we go into it or not, is the reminder that we have these multiple bodies: the physical, the mental, the emotional, the energetic. I mean, think about it this way. Let's say I'm a person who has somehow gone through life to this date untraumatized, and my breath is full and my heart rate is normal, and then something happens. And in a month, 2 months, 3 months, I notice my breath is, I'm breathing as if there's a cylinder around my rib cage that is physically not there. You know what I'm saying? There is no physical reason why I couldn't go ahead and breathe the way I used to breathe, or have a heart rate like I used to have. But I am energetically, emotionally, those bodies are constrained and tight and locked down. So just a reminder that some people can start moving through their trauma by going right into it, speaking it, facing it right away. Other people need to go this way, or they need to start somatically or even energetically. And a reminder to not think of that as woo-woo. I'll remind us of Einstein's equation: energy equals matter times the speed of light. Matter is just condensed energy. So let's not get all caught up in energy as BS. You wouldn't be alive if you didn't have energy. So giving credence and validity to beginning where you need to begin.
I'm conscious of our time. And I think that there's a lot of energy here, and I'd like to propose that we continue the conversation after next week's vodcast. And I would propose that what we do is we title it Complex, because I'm with that theory in mind. This is where we end up. Jung considered complexes to be these splinter personalities that were somewhat cut off from the integrated whole because of trauma. That's the trauma of abandonment or neglect, or the trauma of overwhelmment. And so that these responses that we call triggered, what triggers you, tends to be related to parts of your history that you adapted to and created belief systems and ways of being in the world and a professional identity and a persona and all those parts of the personality that are so based around fear. Our fear of being liked, our fear of being loved, our fear of being appreciated, all that, so on and so forth. So I propose that, but we'll see where we go. Any other thoughts in closing?
So let's close this discussion by each of us giving at least just one tip for anyone who might be watching to handle things when, like a doggy who might need a little behind the ear.
Yes. Having a pet that is, an anxiety. What are they called? What are they called? What are they calling them?
Therapy dogs.
Therapy dog. I guess that, yeah, therapy dogs.
All dogs are really therapy dogs.
That's
honestly.
right. So, Leela Scott, what is your recommendation?
Well, y'all know from other episodes that I have talked a lot about when the knee-jerk reaction when we're triggered is to push it off, push the energy, the feeling off onto somebody else with blame. If you can just take 3 deep breaths and notice that you are the one triggered. When I'm triggered, I am the one triggered, and that I have to take responsibility for that. Not in a way that means the other person didn't do something offensive. That was real. And I don't have to put my energy onto them. And often what we'll do when we catch ourselves doing something we wish we weren't doing any longer is we will catch ourselves doing it and then be really hard on ourselves that we did the thing we didn't want to do. So taking a beat there to congratulate yourself that you did that thing, you stopped before you pushed off into blame. Notice it, be really sweet to yourself that you interrupted that pattern. And then whether it's right then that you're ready to say to whoever, I noticed I'm triggered by something that just happened. Do you have a second to talk about it? Or it happens in 3 days. Just practice coming out of pushing it off and just letting it be something you feel and congratulate yourself for noticing.
Good stuff. Thanks, Leila Scott.
I have a breathing technique that I like. It's kind of like a 3 deep breaths, but it's a long exhale. So it's 3 deep breaths, but with a very long exhale. Yeah, like you're doing, like as if through a straw. And what that does is actually neurologically, it fires your parasympathetic system. It kind of lets you chill out. Your vagus nerve gets activated, and even though that sounds like it would be something stimulating, it actually is calming. And that vagus nerve goes all the way down through your guts. So when you feel that tension down in your low belly, all those people who have that like IBS kind of thing happening when they're anxious, this is one of those breathing techniques that gets all the way down to the root, all the way down to those butterflies in your belly. So I like to say do 3, and if you start to feel like you're getting calm at 3, do 3 more. for good luck. It costs nothing. You're already there. So
Thanks, Ariel. Gia, Rodney?
Okay, yeah, I can go. So I guess I have 3 that I kind of thought of on the spot. The first one being creating a safe space for yourself. I think sometimes feeling unsafe can kind of convince us that we might be in danger or some kind of unprecedented event is going to occur when in fact we are actually okay. So having that safe space, whether you're a kid, an adult, in your 90s, anyone can kind of create that space in terms of kind of even mentalizing and having those resources on hand if you need to call 911, if you need to call a hotline. The second tip is, kind of like what Ariel is doing, using grounding techniques. 5 things you see, 4 things you hear, 3 things you smell, 2 things you taste, and 1 thing that you can hear. I don't know if I skipped any of those. And really being able to kind of help align yourself with your body and be in tune to kind of reorient back to a place where you can just feel grounded within yourself. And then the third is kind of controlling how you confront trauma and being very proactive, kind of like what we've said throughout the vlog. John, I really like the example you gave with having the person kind of let the professor know in terms of, hey, like these are the things that are coming up for me. I just want to know beforehand if they will show up, so that we are, we can educate others on, hey, this is what I need in this space. Is it okay if I miss the class? Or is there a different video or different assignment that I can kind of work on that kind of aligns, but not necessarily puts us in a spot where we feel so overwhelmed or so in danger of, the preceding events, and allowing that exposure come through for us, where we're kind of taking things little by little instead of, the example I like to give is like a soda pop is like, okay, we shake it up. Are we gonna like automatically open the can up right away to let everything kind of burst out, or are we gonna kind of like slowly let some of that air out, so that eventually we can get to a place where we are able to kind of consume whatever's being put out there. Yep.
I would say, in addition to what everyone else has said, which is really a lot of great stuff, journaling is one thing, especially if when things are really high, and best done written with a pen on paper, like actually writing. I mean, you can journal into a computer, whatever. But there's something very different about actually having to choose words and express them than having thoughts just sort of bounce around in your own head. I also find journaling helpful because when you do it over a period of time, when you start to see patterns of getting triggered by certain situations, certain people or whatever, and you look back, the more clearly we see the patterns, the more responsibility we can have for our having a different response to them. I would also say music. Sometimes having a go-to song that calms you down, a go-to song that allows you to be pissed off, whatever it is. But again, concentrating on breath and music, which gets you back into your body and into a different place.
Thanks, Rodney. I want to say, kind of jump on that journaling piece and just extend that a bit, which is that dialoguing, and I wish I lived by this, and I aspire to live by this, but this saying of never waste a complex, never lose an opportunity to dialogue with this part of yourself that's constellating, that has been separated off. And so it seeks out isolation. And so whether it's intrapsychically or interpersonally. So intrapsychically, the way that we do that is we dialogue, we bring it up from the dungeon, where it's hidden and locked away, and begin to talk with it in the same way that example that I used with the soldier. And the second thing is in the interpersonal sphere. It's like all those game shows out there where I forget what game show it is, but phone a friend is an option. Please take an inventory of your friendships. Look at who you have. These are your trusted advisors, and hopefully they're not just yes people. Hopefully they actually make time and space to connect, and phone a friend and talk about what's going on, relate and connect. Yeah, Leila Scott.
Two things came up. When you were talking just now, the dialoguing piece, I really am a big fan of non-dominant hand. Mm-hmm. So when you're speaking to your unconscious, using I'm using my right hand here because I'm left-handed. Your non-dominant hand to be the part of yourself that you're less in touch with. So your dominant hand would ask a question to the part of yourself that you're less in touch with, and your non-dominant hand would answer that question. And you try really hard not to get in the way and edit and be logical, just let come what comes. But the other thing that came to me, Rodney, when you were speaking about music is, of course, smell. Smell is, I'll have to fact check myself after this, but I'm almost 100% sure that smell is the only sense we have that bypasses prefrontal cortex and connects directly to the amygdala. So that's why it's so immediate. And of course, as somebody who's aware of holistic health, please don't choose something that is a fake smell that's synthetic, because it's terrible for you for so many reasons. But if you can find just an essential oil that appeals to you, of course, lavender is ubiquitous, is the most calming, but there are other ones out there if lavender is not your thing. We work with lotus way flower essences all the time. But smell is, say again?
Check below for resources, the Lotus Way stuff.
Check below for resources. And just a small piece on that is the flower essences are not essential oils. They're very different. Essential oils are concentrated, very thick, heavy versions of the physical plant, whereas flower essences are simply like the dew collected from that plant. And so it's vibrational essence. And we talked before how that is a very real thing and not something woo-woo, but because it is so micro, when you breathe it in, it goes in on a very, very, very deep level that a macro particle could not get to. So smells, big one.
Okay, you guys, thanks for hanging out, and be sure to hang around next week for a conversation about death. For now, thanks for being here. For those of you watching, be sure to like and subscribe to the page. Hit that bell so you get notifications when new episodes come out. And cruise around the resource page below and check out all the other cool stuff we're up to at the Center for the Healing Arts and Sciences. Thanks for being here, and see you next time.